Long ago. Well, back in the late 90s anyways, video game developer Squaresoft put out Final Fantasy VII. The role-playing game Fantasy Subversion was a huge hit and considered a system seller for the PlayStation, meaning one of the reasons for the video game console's current dominance in the video game marketplace landscape of today can be traced back to this game. But this isn't a video about why the game was so good, but rather why people seem so worked up about its coming remake. Why, if you type the words Final Fantasy VII into YouTube's search engine, you're inevitably going to come across hundreds of videos like this.
They really did it! Fuck yes! They fucking did it! Oh.
Why? Let me explain.
And who are you guys cosplaying as today?
I'm cosplaying as Reno from Final Fantasy VII.
I'm cosplaying Vincent Valentine from Final Fantasy VII.
I have the Final Fantasy VII Potion Minisect, Vincent, Sephiroth, Cloud Strife from Having Children, Tifa, Cloud Strife, Aerith, Zack, and Reno and Rude.
It's incredibly difficult to explain your fandom to someone else. How do you show someone your fandom? Do you reveal your shrine of related paraphernalia? Make a website devoted to said pop culture obsession? What do you do? Final Fantasy VII is hugely beloved, with a massive, passionate fan base that spans the globe. It's also a janky old game from 1997. It has its charm, but try explaining it to the uninitiated. Make an attempt to explain that plot and setting to a stranger. Try getting someone who's never heard of the game to even play it. Even after managing to accomplish that, it's even harder to explain why a remake of the game gets us so excited. Compare the original game with a recent AAA title. With today's glitzy, gorgeous games and their realistic, high-definition cinematic presentations, it's barely a competition. Though the somewhat recent rise of the indie scene in game development has made a headway into making sprite and pixel-based game styles somewhat popular again, the early 3D games of the mid to late 90s are generally considered crude, inferior eyesores. The hope has always been that a remake of the original Final Fantasy VII, with a complete graphical overhaul, a better translation, and quality action, would lend a level of credibility to the game.
More than 200 animators and programmers. A multi-million-dollar production. Over 2 years in the making. And a cast of thousands. They said it couldn't be done in a major motion picture. They were right. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
A lot of focus was put on the game's visual presentation back when it first arrived. Indeed, its gameplay is actually rarely discussed. Though I think credit should be given to the developers for incorporating the fantasy world elements into the game's battle system, Final Fantasy VII is a game much more known for its plot and characters that inhabit its setting. Looking at it now, especially in comparison to what modern games can look like, it's tough to infer what to even think. See, we the fans have always known its depth, its fantastic twists and turns, great writing, and wonderful characters, and we want to share it. But we also want the game to reflect that magic we had to imagine ourselves back in the mid-90s. The magic seen in countless pieces of beautiful fan art made over the last 20 or so years. The game had a glorious design back then. You could see what it wanted to be, but you could also literally feel the limitations of the age. A remake has always seemed just beyond our grasp. Despite what was said to us officially, it always felt right around the corner. As the years drew on, the hope and belief turned to desperation and cynicism for many. And I want to explain what it meant when the remake was announced in 2015. I can totally get the confusion many people had when they saw hundreds and thousands of ecstatic reactions all over the internet. Why there was a market for Final Fantasy VII Remake reaction videos on YouTube. But I have to go back, way back, to the turn of the century. As an aside, for those who don't know, the Final Fantasy series is really only a series in name only. The games generally do not connect to one another. Final Fantasy II is not really a sequel, narratively speaking, to Final Fantasy. Though there are themes and some visual continuity, each installment acts as a separate narrative. As ridiculous as it sounds, if there's a sequel, they generally add a numerical reference, like Final Fantasy X-2 is the sequel to Final Fantasy X, or a subtitle, like Final Fantasy IV's sequel, Final Fantasy IV The After Years. Basically, though they all share a common name, each game is generally a standalone title. Got it? Good. The first Final Fantasy through Final Fantasy VI use a pixel-based graphical style, always in 2 dimensions. The 7th installment, the developer, Squaresoft, wanted to move into the 3rd dimension. With a huge team and not always a solid look to go with, they eventually succeeded. Still, it was quite apparent the primitive animations were poor approximations. It was what it was. But having been brought up with pixel-based characters, we were able to imagine what they needed to be. Plus, almost side by side to these character approximations, there were these beautiful hand-drawn character portraits. So we only need to bridge that gap slightly in our minds. Well, for a couple of years. These games had always prided themselves on their presentation, and the move to 3D had proved hugely successful. The next game would follow suit. Final Fantasy VIII showed up in 1999, and it was immediately thought of as visually superior to its predecessor. The characters seemed tall and thin, but were undoubtedly more human-looking than the blocky, handless heroes of Final Fantasy VII. Where the characters of 7 just sort of loaded themselves into your avatar as if he were a vehicle to move about the game's areas, in Final Fantasy VIII they followed your avatar close behind. It was also sort of silly, but considerably less so. And that was kind of the first straw, to see the follow-up, generally considered to be a lesser game, be just a little better in presentation. In the build-up to the series' 10th installment, it was revealed in an interview that PlayStation 2 remakes of Final Fantasy VII, 8, and 9 were in the works. When Final Fantasy X came out for the PlayStation 2, featuring even more lifelike characters created using motion capture technology and had actual voice acting, wheels really began turning. What would Final Fantasy VII be like with realistic graphics? Series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi would later comment of the remake idea there was no specific movement in that regard. Word seemed to peter out officially, but rumors quickly took hold, and with these rumors came the naysayers. Some were trolls, and some were just people on the other end of fandom who didn't care for Final Fantasy VII and cared even less to see people excited for it. Then came Advent Children. Admittedly, the first time I saw a trailer for this, I thought it was a remake. When the trailer showed Final Fantasy VII's protagonist Cloud walking through that familiar church, I believed. It was just that, well, everything else in the trailer was wrong. But it turned out it was a sequel in the form of a CGI film. And whatever your thoughts were on the final product, it only helped along rumors of Final Fantasy VII being remade. Some of this was lessened with the simultaneous announcement of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, a series of spin-off games, features, and novellas set in the same universe. This inundation of new material helped considerably, but it also did beg the question, if Final Fantasy VII was getting this kind of attention, why not simply remake the original game as well, so we could enjoy it alongside the prequels, sequels, and so on. There was an early split here as well among the fanbase. Some liked the compilation, some did not. Indeed, the titles in the compilation seemed to lack the resonance of the original title. To many, they felt like cash grabs. To others, they were all we had. Regardless, one of the few things most fans would agree on was the desire to see a full remake of the original game. Square Enix's decision not to appease the fans in this regard was made all the more maddening by their decision to use the opening of the original game as the basis for the technical demonstration for the PlayStation 3 at the 2005 E3 conference. This played alongside a trailer for Crisis Core, though the Crisis Core trailer was almost entirely animated in a classic anime style, so attention immediately went to that tech demo. Square Enix CEO Yuichi Wada was quick to dismiss the idea of a remake, but the idea exploded anyway. Articles were written, rumors spread like wildfire. There is probably no other single event that has spurred on the imaginations of fans than this tech demo. Images from this demonstration would be used for years for the rumors and the annual April Fool's jokes. So seismic was the release of this demo that most reporting on the very idea of a remake focuses on it as the very genesis of the idea. And while not true, it definitely helped push the concept to many who had probably not even considered it. A secret ending at the conclusion of Crisis Core seemed to use the tech demo's general look and feel to recreate the now iconic opening. And a single phrase, "To be continued in Final Fantasy VII," gave great hope to the many fans wishing for that remake. Again, the optimism of the fans was met with backlash. When pressed, Square Enix employees tried to sound realistic in their shutdowns of the rumors. Their dreams dashed, fans were incredulous at first, and that often turned into bitterness. As if the gaming giant was somehow sitting on a money egg and refusing to let it hatch. Met with all the negativity on the internet, many still remained hopeful. Seeing so much of Final Fantasy VII's flagship imagery gorgeously reproduced for Crisis Core certainly helped, and the internet, an endless bastion for everything and everyone, developed large communities where fans could commiserate and speculate. By the time of the next decade, that single word, remake, carried its own weight among the Final Fantasy VII fandom. The desire for such a thing was long-lasting and intense enough it was picked up and used for clickbait articles on gaming sites. By this point, however, in fan circles, optimism, often enough, had turned to a dry, battle-weathered cynicism. Again, to illustrate my main point here, this speculation of a remake had been going on for a decade. There was no official word, but many of us held on to a bizarre sort of hope. Hope that was barely tethered to anything but our shared fandom of one game from almost a decade and a half earlier. But even amongst the true believers, patience wore thin. My own low point in the fandom came around this same time. One Friday morning I found myself perusing the message boards of the fan site thelifestream.net and came across the following post. It was a cool breakdown of why this one person had felt burned by the compilation and how it affected the original game. But it wasn't just that. I'd heard similar arguments before. It was the sad, nodding heads of the fellow commenters on a website dedicated to the love of this game. I'd spent over a decade not letting this negativity in, and suddenly I saw it everywhere. Felt it, in articles that felt like hit pieces. And if it wasn't in the articles, it was definitely in the comments section below.
But we've had enough. Let's abandon this stupid dream by giving you 5 reasons why a Final Fantasy VII Remake will never ever happen.
This was it. Naysaying negativity piled on and on. Always the rumors, then the negativity, a dash of hope, a landslide of negativity. And maybe it was time to move on. The video game landscape had changed considerably since Final Fantasy VII had come out. Storylines were far more immersive. The Mass Effect series had pushed player choice to new heights among mainstream gaming, and the Uncharted games were noteworthy for their beautiful locales, blockbuster action, fun characters, and cinematic presentation. Final Fantasy itself would see it become less and less of the powerhouse flagship series it had once been. Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV were both MMORPGs, chasing the popularity of games such as World of Warcraft. These games are quite popular and definitely have their fans, mind you, but they are not the single-player adventures one immediately thinks upon hearing the name Final Fantasy. In fact, even in the realm of RPGs, the Japanese role-playing games were finding themselves falling behind in terms of popularity, with games like Skyrim and the modern Fallout sequels taking a firm hold on the genre. Some blame the creatives at Square. When the film, Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, failed at the box office, Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi resigned from the company. Square was forced to merge with Dragon Quest creator Enix, becoming Square Enix. Final Fantasy series composer Nobuo Uematsu left the company to work freelance. Character designer and later game director Tetsuya Nomura became famous for his long creation process, starting with Kingdom Hearts in 2002. This series would find itself at 13 installments by 2019, including remakes and remasters. Most fans blame the Square Enix Corporation and thus the executives in charge for what they perceived as a decline in the quality of games. In particular, many blame Square Enix CEO Yoichi Wada and his tendency to milk successful projects by pushing for multiple spin-offs and sequels. In fact, in an interview he once remarked, "It's very difficult to hit the jackpot, as it were. Once we've hit it, we have to get all the juice possible out of it." So when Yoichi Wada left his position at Square Enix in 2013, it was something of a relief. But it wasn't a guarantee. He may have been something of a bean counter, but he wasn't wrong when he talked about how difficult it would be to make a full remake of Final Fantasy VII. Anyone who had bothered to put serious thought into it knew it would be a huge undertaking, one that probably wouldn't happen in a risk-averse corporation. And yet, when Shinji Hashimoto walked out onto that stage in December of 2014, so many of us truly thought that it would happen.
Wait a minute, no!
One of the most iconic video game.
Oh my fuck!
Made debut. It's a debut on the original PlayStation.
No.
Now, 3 generations back to the PlayStation.
Are you fucking shitting me? Need details. Alright, don't fuck with people like this. We need details! Am I so hyped for nothing? Is it all for nothing? I don't want PS1 graphics. What is it, 1080p? What the shit is that? That is so fucked up! You guys screwed it up! How did you... Fucking boo!
The PC release of the Final Fantasy
Oh
VII
my god!
exclusivity to PlayStation 4 this spring.
Dude, we don't... Nobody cares! Look at everybody, they're so pissed!
With the upscaled original graphics.
Upscaled fucking graphics! Oh yeah, that's exactly what we wanted, dude! Thank you so much for the 1080p PS1 game!
Of Little Big Planet.
Oh, awesome! Good for you!
We are on modern console.
Why would you give this dude stage time?
And happy PlayStation experience.
Why would you give that guy stage time? No, fuck this! That's fucking ridiculous! God.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back...
But it didn't. And it felt like even Square Enix was laughing at us. In fact, there were plenty of people who could carefully explain why there would never be a remake. They could go point by point, as in that post from 2010. Though after 15 years had passed since the original game, to do so seemed less a benevolent service than it was a sort of trolling. The people doing this didn't seem to be there to let someone down gently. In general, it would appear they just didn't like seeing someone else having a good time. Comedian Patton Oswalt once said, "Nothing creates rage on the internet like sincerely enjoying something. That drives people up the fucking wall." I say all this not to call people out for losing faith or being jerks. Well, some of them, you know who you are. But to sympathize. I get it. I was once a smug little edgelord idiot too. But I was also a fan. I was on these sites seeing the same discussion crop up over and over. It was hard for me too. You grow a thick skin and you get cynical. You lose hope and replace it with a level of fervent disbelief you tell yourself is just skepticism. By the beginning of 2014, another rumor had begun spreading about the remake. While the eye rolls were there, some sites began pushing it as well, citing the source as an industry insider, known as Verendus. To be upfront here, I have to admit I've considered not telling any of this person's story. It has always seemed quite sketchy. Spurious even, but here goes. Back in 2013, over on the ever-temperamental NeoGAF, user Verendus posted a riddle claiming it contained a megaton, as in, a bomb. After decrypting his clues, it was fairly quickly deduced that Verendus was talking about a Final Fantasy VII Remake. Verendus had a bit of a reputation and was rumored to be an associate of, or actually a Sony employee, with a decent amount of access. However, in all my time on NeoGAF, I always got the sense his predictions were more like educated guesses. He seemed to be about as accurate as the supposed medium John Edwards.
He's doing something very different for me than I think the norm would be for what he would do. So if he normally did ABC as a firefighter, that day he did 1, 2, 3 in addition to ABC.
Hell, there were people in the same threads where he was throwing his jokes and guesses out that were making stabs in the dark that turned out more accurate than his vague predictions. Heck, I was able to correctly predict the next venue of remake information months ahead of time, that it would be a teaser and we would see a full trailer with Cloud on a motorcycle no less at E3 in 2019. In fact, I argued all the way up to the actual trailer reveal the game would comprise an expanded Midgar, amidst some calling it impossible. And I promise I am no insider. These were very basic, educated guesses, being far more conservative than the stuff Verendus is throwing out. And it's important to note, just before Verendus dropped their megaton, they were joking about the very possibility of a remake. Eurogamer ran an article calling Final Fantasy VII the game that killed Squaresoft. From there, Verendus was making jokes about it just like everyone else, and barely a month later they announced their riddle. The forums, as they happen to be anymore by this point, were largely incredulous. The vague answers, when pressed, were puzzling. One has to remember, the NeoGAF are often considered a cesspool by actual industry insiders. People can be frighteningly cruel. It would not be entirely out of the question for this person to have insider information. It's just kind of a stretch. And yet, a lot of people gave credence to Verendus. When they published a list of games to be shown at E3, people thought it was another riddle. And I would bet on Verendus just enjoying that level of attention. That being said, as someone who tries to be very positive, there was something reassuring about not just the content of details provided by this supposed leaker, but in the confidence with which they would say it. So if you liked the idea of what Verendus would say being true, it was nice to hear. But if you didn't, it doesn't really matter. It was just another rumor in a sea filled with them. Official channels ran the story anyway. Another April 1st came and went, but the rumor kept going strong. Even beyond that year's E3, the consensus among many fans was that Square Enix knew and understood the demand, but was saving such a move until the company was in dire straits. The running joke along these lines had an encased Final Fantasy VII Remake button marked "In case of emergency." Savvy fans understood a proper remake would likely require the involvement of what was sometimes referred to as the Big Three: original director Yoshinori Kitase, original writer KAZUSHIGE NOJIMA, and frequent series creative Tetsuya Nomura. A fourth, often discussed and wished of collaborator, was series composer Nobuo Uematsu. The most optimistic of us saw a real possibility. Kitase still worked for Square Enix, usually as a producer. Nojima had gone freelance, but would still work for the company from time to time. But Nomura seemed to be quite busy with the Kingdom Hearts games. When asked about the prospect of a remake at the beginning of 2014, Kitase seemed struck by the importance of such a task. He said if he did it, it would have to be his life's work. As positive as Kitase sounded about how he would approach a remake, this interview neither confirmed nor denied the actual prospect of seeing one. So when Hashimoto laughed on stage that following December to the bemused reaction of the crowd, it was just another day. In 2015, What'sAGeek.com ran that year's now gross tradition of the April Fool's Final Fantasy VII Remake story. A joke that somehow never got old, nor actually funny. Fortunately, would be the last. Sure, similar attempts would be made in later years based on when we would get more news, but the old fake remake bit would be finally retired. Now, I hope I've explained what all that means. After years of rumors, insults, and insinuations, when they finally dropped that trailer, well...
Final Fantasy VII Remake is happening. It's happening.
Oh, my body! Wait for it. Yes!
Land first!
They pushed the fucking button with urgency! And fucking up today! Ready, get high! Ready, let's go! Ready!
Whether it was an emotional release, a day of reckoning, or kind of embarrassing, it was big in a way it's hard to explain without telling the whole history of it all. And you know what's really crazy? It turns out Square Enix was laughing at us. Or maybe it was just nervous laughter, because they understood the scope of the remake much more than the fans. And oddly enough, that is what the first trailer was all about. For the uninitiated, the cryptic trailer uses a crazy amount of doublespeak, which I will attempt to decrypt for you here.
Long ago, we looked upon a foreboding sky.
This is a reference to the late game portion of the original Final Fantasy VII. Even with the crude graphics of the time, the mood from the site was quite foreboding.
The memory of the star that threatened all burns eternal in our hearts.
Again, a vague reference to late game events, but it's also possibly a veiled reference to the game itself, which was a huge project. If it failed, it might have been the end for the company. It was, in many respects, the star project for Squaresoft. And of course, the use of the word "our" here shares the meaning the original game had not just for its fans, but its creators as well.
In its wake came an age of silence.
Despite all the compilation and official musings on the matter, there was never actual word on a remake. And then, the first name.
Yet with each fond remembrance, we knew those encountered were not forgotten.
Then, another name. Scenario writer KAZUSHIGE NOJIMA. 2 out of 3.
That someday we would see them again.
This is straight up referencing the hope, long gestating, of a remake.
Perhaps it was no more than wishful thinking.
Again, they are more or less telling us they too have long contemplated this remake, and they follow this up with the final name, Tetsuya Nomura. And it hardly seems possible at this point that it could actually be happening.
But after the long calm, there are now the beginnings of a stir.
They've begun working on it. Finally.
The reunion at hand may bring joy. It may bring fear.
In the original game, at least in the English language version, there is much talk of an event called the reunion, so this is already coded language for fans. But also it takes on the meaning of the reunion between the fandom and the game, and they are well aware of how pleased we will be in knowing it will be coming along. They are also aware of our fears. What if it's bad? What if it's simply mediocre?
But let us embrace whatever it brings. For they are coming back.
Forget 15 years of bitterness and cynicism. The wait is over.
At last, the promise has been made.
They are committing themselves to doing it, and after the brief glimpse of two of the most popular characters, the screen fades out. Fans by this point don't even need the name. They know the logo. And more importantly, that one word. I'm of the opinion, whether or not the remake itself fulfills this promise, that this first trailer is one of the most audacious, grandiose, self-aware pieces of advertisement ever, perfectly crafted, starting with the Advent childrenish aesthetic of its opening, including the use of a song from that film's score, to the color palette change, and further down into the depths of Midgar slums, as if it were crawling back down into the deepest recesses of our collective memories. This is a teaser trailer made by and for fans of Final Fantasy VII. So yes, whatever the remake ultimately brings, we can remember that one moment, that single time on the internet, that all the negativity and general disappointment was briefly beaten back with a single concentrated beam of hope. A golden, shiny wire, if you will.